be a beautiful day today. Sunshine throughout. Low humidity. Really a splendid September day. The afternoon temperature about 80 degrees.
On September 11, 2001, 4 commercial American airplanes were hijacked by Middle Eastern terrorists.
This just in, you are looking at obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
One of the first things people noticed is papers coming down, flying over them.
My gosh.
And
oh my God, what's going on?
Huge tremor. Oh.
There's another plane.
Okay, we just all felt that. The whole building just shook.
That was another plane.
That looked like another plane just...
What is going on?
Airplanes were flown into each of the World Trade Center towers in New York. One was flown into the side of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and one crashed into a field in Pennsylvania when the passengers aboard the aircraft overpowered the hijackers. Over 3,000 people were killed that day, including more than 400 police officers and firefighters who rushed to the scenes to help. It was quickly discovered that an Islamist terrorist group, Qaeda, was responsible for the attacks. The attacks seemed to come out of nowhere, and fear was palpable. Why had this happened? Could it have been prevented? Why did these terrorists want to take innocent American lives? After that day, Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden became household names. People knew that they were terrorists, and that they were responsible for the atrocities of that day. But other than that, most people knew nothing. Despite very modest beginnings in Afghanistan in the late 1980s, Al-Qaeda transformed steadily throughout the 1990s as they gained experience from terrorist attacks in several countries. Through multiple training camps, large amounts of money, and a radical mission, Al-Qaeda evolved from a relatively unknown organization committing small-scale attacks to one willing to and capable of committing the devastating attack that was September 11, 2001. Hassan al-Banna was born on October 14, 1906, in a small town near Cairo, Egypt. A devout Muslim and a supporter of Hitler and the Nazi regime, al-Banna became angry with Britain's attempts to westernize Egypt and felt this modernization went against traditional Islamic principles. In 1928, al-Banna formed the Muslim Brotherhood, an underground group that rejected all Western influences and who believed that all countries should be governed by Islamic law. Al-Banna used local social and charitable organizations to recruit members, gaining their trust and showing them the importance of Islam in all aspects of life. They provided members with training in military and terrorist tactics. In 1939, the Muslim Brotherhood became an official political group. According to Al-Banna, it is the nature of Islam to dominate, not to be dominated, to impose its law on all nations and to extend its power to the entire planet. As of 1948, membership may have exceeded 2 million people. It has branches in 70 countries and is said to be the root source for Islamic terrorism. In 1969, Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian-born teacher of Islamic law at the University of Jordan, joined the Jordanian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. He was fired from the university for his involvement with the Brotherhood. He then moved to Saudi Arabia and taught at King Abdulaziz University, where he first met a young Osama bin Laden. Azzam, who was inspired by the Brotherhood, believed it was the personal obligation of every Muslim to defend Islamic lands. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in an effort to expand their sphere of influence into a country with a crumbling and unstable government. Azzam believed Afghanistan needed to be protected because, at the time, the population was mostly Muslims. In 1984, he moved to Peshawar on the border of Pakistan, where with the financial help of bin Laden and the help of the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, he established the Office of Services. The Office of Services, also known as Al-Qifa, meaning struggle, was used to coordinate the Afghani Mujahideen fighting force and was a center for recruiting and donations. He claimed the war was a jihad, or a righteous struggle against non-believers. Between 1985 and 1989, Azzam traveled to American cities to raise money and promote the Afghani cause, recruiting thousands of new fighters and believers. By recruiting both Arab and non-Arab volunteers, he began the idea of the first global jihad. While his intention was to support the Mujahideen, he was also beginning to lay the foundation for a larger organization, one which would fight for Islam and expand its influence around the globe. Azzam did not like the Western influences present in the Middle East, such as the appearance of radio and television in Saudi Arabia, and believed Western nations such as the United States would ultimately try to take over the region and quash Islam. He accused Jews and Christians of conspiring against Islam, and believed the solution was jihad and the rifle alone, no negotiations, no conferences, and no dialogues. In the April 1988 issue of Al-Jihad, a magazine started by bin Laden and Azzam which glorified battle and denounced the actions of the Soviets, Azzam outlined the need for a non-governmental organization to protect the integrity of Islam. Bin Laden later used this outline to form Al-Qaeda. He claimed that stooges of the West and pro-American groups were destroying the jihad and were trying to rule the world without reference to the Quran. He wrote, "It is the duty of the children of the Islamic world to firmly stand by this solid base, with their wealth and their lives." In Arabic, solid base translates to Al-Qaeda al-Sulba. When bin Laden later formed Azzam's group, he shortened the name to the Base, or Al-Qaeda. In 1989, Azzam and his two sons were killed when a bomb exploded in their car in Peshawar. This was believed to be the work of Soviet agents, but no assassin has ever been confirmed. As the final Soviet troops left Afghanistan in 1989, bin Laden and a few others, including Ayman al-Zawahiri, established al-Qaeda to keep the jihad alive after the Soviets were gone. Al-Zawahiri had been an active member of the Egyptian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, but believed the Brotherhood was too weak in the jihad in Egypt. One of al-Qaeda's main goals was to drive Western influence from the Middle East and return to a society governed by a strict interpretation of the Quran. The United States was seen as their biggest threat because they provided support for other infidel governments, such as Israel, which was targeted because it was believed they had taken Arab lands, and also because most Israelis did not practice Islam. Both bin Laden and al-Zawahiri were members of al-Qaeda's Consultation Council, which discussed and approved major al-Qaeda attacks. On August 2, 1990, while bin Laden was in Saudi Arabia, Iraq invaded US-supported Kuwait. Because of Kuwait's close proximity to Saudi Arabia, the Saudi government invited the United States to position troops in the country to protect them. Bin Laden was enraged, viewing this action as an antecedent to a Western military conquest of the Middle East, as well as a culture attack against Islamic culture. This conflict became known as the Persian Gulf War. When the war ended in early 1991, the Saudi government refused to order U.S. troops stationed there to leave. This greatly angered bin Laden, who made it one of the principal goals of al-Qaeda to drive U.S. forces from Saudi Arabia. Due to his newfound opposition to the Saudi government, bin Laden was forced to flee Saudi Arabia in 1991. He established al-Qaeda headquarters in Sudan, which, at the time, was allowing any Muslims into the country without passports to show Islamic solidarity. In Sudan, bin Laden set up a series of businesses, including an investment company, a construction company, a tannery, and a variety of others. The money earned by these companies was used to pay for the travel of al-Qaeda operatives and the procurement of explosives and weapons. As bin Laden recruited more operatives, he began purchasing land for training camps, where trainees were educated in military tactics and explosives. He also purchased warehouses to store explosives in, provided guest houses in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other countries across the Middle East, and transported currency and weapons to al-Qaeda cells in various countries. Bin Laden operated al-Qaeda like a franchise, providing financial and logistical support to terrorist cells in a large number of countries. The first attack thought to be linked to al-Qaeda was on December 29, 1992, when a bomb exploded in a hotel in Yemen where U.S. troops had been staying. 2 Austrian tourists were killed. The troops had left earlier. Later, in February of 1993, a truck bomb exploded in the parking garage of the World Trade Center in the United States, killing 6 and injuring hundreds. In October of the same year, 18 U.S. personnel stationed in Mogadishu, Somalia, for Operation Restore Hope were killed by terrorists trained by al-Qaeda. As al-Qaeda's actions and attacks escalated, the Saudi government realized bin Laden was dangerous and revoked his citizenship, freezing his assets in the country. In 1996, Sudan, due to pressure from the United States and Saudi Arabia, expelled bin Laden, and he fled to Afghanistan, where he was protected by the Taliban. On August 23, 1996, bin Laden released a fatwa, or a legal ruling on Islamic law, against the United States. Published in a London-based newspaper, the document was titled Declaration of Jihad Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Mosques. Bin Laden urged all Muslims to band together against the U.S., saying, "The occupying American enemy is the principal and the main cause of the situation. Therefore, efforts should be concentrated on destroying, fighting, and killing the enemy until, by the grace of Allah, it is completely defeated." Bin Laden called for a boycott of all American goods and criticized the presence of U.S. troops in Somalia, praising martyrdom and those who died to kill Americans. He also described a desire to remove U.S. troops from the Arabian Peninsula by force, to overthrow the Saudi government, and to support Islamic revolutionary groups worldwide. In response to the declaration, Peter Arnett and a small team from CNN went to Afghanistan to interview bin Laden. Bin Laden explained some of his reasons for the declaration.
The U.S. government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we believe the U.S. is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the U.S.
What are your future plans?
You'll see them and hear about them in the media, God willing.
Meanwhile, as bin Laden was preparing for his next series of attacks by sending thousands of dollars to an al-Qaeda cell in Kenya, he was also drafting another fatwa against the U.S. The second fatwa, published in February of 1998, was signed by bin Laden, al-Zawahiri, and other senior members of al-Qaeda. It condemned the United States for their support for Israel, their continued presence in Saudi Arabia, and called for more drastic action. The ruling to kill the Americans and their allies, civilians and military, is an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible. Following the printing of this fatwa, ABC's John Miller interviewed bin Laden in Afghanistan, where bin Laden again insisted that Americans and their allies had wronged the Muslim people and should be killed whenever possible. On August 7, 1998, a pickup truck loaded with TNT and detonators exploded near the back of the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya. 213 people were killed and more than 4,500 were injured. 10 minutes later, a truck loaded with similar materials exploded at the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, killing 11 people and injuring 85. The United States responded to these attacks by firing Tomahawk missiles at a suspected al-Qaeda training camp in Khost, Afghanistan. No casualties were ever reported, and the effectiveness of the strikes was later questioned. In January of 2000, 2 Yemeni terrorists associated with al-Qaeda attempted to bomb the USS Sullivan, which was at the time stationed in Yemen. However, they piled too many explosives onto the skiff, which promptly sank and failed to detonate. In October of that same year, they repeated the operation, this time with success. The 2 suicide bombers detonated explosives alongside the USS Cole, killing 17 United States sailors. While smaller attacks like this continued to happen around the world, bin Laden was planning something bigger. After the 1998 bombings of Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, bin Laden began to orchestrate a plan in which 10 aircraft would fly into buildings in large American cities on the east and west coasts. His plan was modeled after a terrorist attack that occurred in 1994, when 4 Algerian terrorists planned to fly a plane into the Eiffel Tower, but failed when the French armed forces stormed the plane and killed the hijackers. Bin Laden quickly decided that 10 planes was too ambitious for his plan, and limited his attack to the east coast of the United States. He named this operation the Manhattan Raid. In addition to his goal of killing as many Americans as possible, Bin Laden's objective in the planning of these attacks was to provoke the United States into a bleeding war in Afghanistan. He got this idea from the Soviet-Afghan War of the 1980s, in which the Soviet Union was bled dry in Afghanistan and collapsed soon after its troops left the country. Bin Laden believed that if the U.S. went to war with Afghanistan, the same results would ensue, and the United States would at last be defeated. The plan, which began in 1998, required $500,000 in funding as al-Qaeda sent operatives to be trained in flight schools in the United States and amassed explosives. 19 hijackers were selected to carry out the mission. 4 were pilot hijackers who would take over and fly the planes, and the other 13 were known as muscle hijackers, whose job it was to subdue the pilots, crew, and passengers so that the pilot hijackers could do their job. Between January and August of 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States issued 15 advisories to American airlines and airports, warning that terrorists may attempt to hijack American planes. In August and early September of that same year, Bin Laden warned his close associates and supporters to return to Afghanistan from countries around the world before September 10th. September 11, 2001 was a day that will live forever in American memory. The attacks caused more than $100 billion in property damage, killed more than 3,000 people, and led President Bush to declare a war on terror. Although many believe that the September 11th attacks were the pinnacle of al-Qaeda's destructive power, some argue that the worst is yet to come.